Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. In this video, I'm going to react to the Boston molasses disaster. Now, I had no clue about this. I still don't, to be honest, until it was recommended in a video that I put out yesterday, I think, or the day before. A lot of people clicked on the thumbs up, so it must be something that people want to see. From some basic Googling, I think a lot of molasses rushed from somewhere and killed a whole bunch of people. So yeah, quite a horrific story. I'm eager to find out what actually happened, so this should be an interesting one, so let's do it.
In 1914, the demand for molasses reached an all-time high. The thick brown syrup that's derived from sugarcane was commonly used as a sweetener, much less expensive than granulated white sugar. It could be further refined into rum, and even further refined in something called industrial alcohol, which was used in the making of explosives, which were in high demand because of the war in Europe. The United States Industrial Alcohol Company produced and distilled molasses using a subsidiary called the Purity Distilling Company of Boston, Massachusetts. And there they stored millions of gallons of molasses, some 40% denser than water, in a tank at 529.
40% denser than, so that stuff is thick, like gooey.
Commercial Street, near Keeney Square. The Great Boston Molasses Disaster of January 15th, 1919, deserves to be remembered. In 1915, the Purity Distilling Company rushed construction of a storage tank in the north end of Boston and left the construction to be overseen by Arthur P. Gell, their financial advisor. Gell had no architectural or technical experience and was even unable to properly read plans and blueprints. He also had no experience with safety factors and hadn't planned or even asked about these things. In fact, by the time he had locked down the location of their tank, they had only 2 months to complete the project before their first large shipment.
So of course, they were going to cut corners. There's no way around it.
Arrived. The tank was 50 feet tall, 90 feet across, and capable of holding 2.5 million gallons of molasses, making it one of the largest storage containers in the city of Boston. The tank's construction used large curved steel plates, 7 vertical rows overlapping horizontally and held together with rivets set onto a concrete base. Its construction cost United States Industrial Alcohol $30,000. The tank was located just 200 feet from the harbor, and also located nearby the railroad tracks, making it convenient for Purity Distilling for offloading molasses from the ships that delivered it from Cuba until it was ready to be delivered by train to their refinery in East Cambridge. But Jet had cut corners. When it was finished in 1915, the tank wasn't even properly tested because the first shipment of molasses was coming too soon, so instead of filling it all the way up with water, he just put in 6 inches of water and declared it structurally sound. What's more, since it was considered to be a container and not a building, there were no building permits, there were no inspections, they weren't even required in 1915. The tank was a looming presence over the nearby immigrant Italian and Irish neighborhoods and the thriving businesses along Commercial Street, and will continue to be so for a number of years. From the onset, it was clear the tank had issues. It would groan when filled, and the tank often leaked its molasses under the streets, much to the joy of the local children who would collect the syrup from the leaking rivets. At least one employee warned that the tank was structurally unsound, but the United States Industrial Alcohol Company did little about it aside from recalking areas that leaked.
I mean, this is just complete negligence. Obviously, back then there was no, very little, regulations and stuff. But man, this is just such negligent behavior.
In fact, they even went so far as to repaint the entire tank brown in an attempt to hide the many areas that showed leakage. In January 1919, a little over 3 years after the tank's construction, World War I was over. The Spanish flu pandemic was behind us, and the Red Sox had just won the World Series. With the end of the war, the demand for molasses had declined, and the announcement of the upcoming prohibition that would take effect the following year spurred Purity Distilling to try to outrace prohibition by making and selling as much rum as they could before it was enacted. The steamship Miliero arrived at the North End docks January 12, 1919, and unloaded 600,000 gallons of molasses into the Purity Distilling Company's tank.
6,000 gallons?
It was not a fast process, as molasses is thick and viscous, and took a little over a full day to transfer. In the end, the delivery would bring the contents of the massive tank to over 2 million gallons, very close to its maximum capacity. Then on Wednesday, January 15th, weeks after freezing cold weather, Boston experienced what is known as a January thaw, or false spring, which according to the Farmer's Almanac is weather which can last for up to about a week, with temperatures rising an average of about 10 degrees Fahrenheit higher than the previous week before dropping back down to usual January temperatures. Bostonians took advantage of the warmer weather, many of them throwing open their windows and taking their daily chores outside, such as 65-year-old Bridget Clarity and her family, who lived across from the tank at the base of Copp's Hill Terrace, and William White, superintendent of the Purity Distilling Company, who decided to leave early to enjoy some lunchtime shopping with his wife, leaving the tank unsupervised. The warm weather was affecting the new shipment of molasses as well. As the weather warmed, the molasses began to ferment, something that was unusual for that time of year. The tank did have a vent, albeit only one, that was intended to help release the gases that would come from fermentation, but because it was January, that vent was closed, trapping that pressure.
No. So the thing is just going to be like...
At the tank. It was around 12:30 when it started. Witnesses and survivors say that they suddenly noticed a rat-a-tat-tat noise that sounded like a machine gun, followed by a slow rumble that was felt for blocks. The noise was caused by the rivets blowing out of the tank as it seemed to disintegrate, falling down upon itself and releasing the built-up energy of 2.3 million gallons of molasses, and sending a 25-foot wave traveling 35 miles per hour into the streets, spreading in all directions.
Man, hold on a minute. Look at all of this damage, man. Jeez.
25-foot wave traveling 35 miles per hour into the streets, spreading in all directions. Patrolman Frank McManus, on a routine patrol along Commercial Street, happened to be about 100 feet from the tank when it went. He said, "I felt some wet, sticky substance strike me about the shoulders, first thinking it was mud, and then he saw the tank fall. He was able to escape the wave by dashing up a side street and called for backup. Send all available rescue vehicles and personnel, immediately." H.M. Dorley, a Boston and Worcester Street Railway Company freight agent, heard the rumble and felt his building shake and instinctively knew what it was. "The molasses tank is gone," he cried. Words that were barely out of his mouth when the wave hit his office, trapping Dorley and his co-workers inside for hours as the molasses swept past. Dorley was quoted in the Boston Post. "The broken parts of the tank missed our shed by only a matter of inches. If they had struck it, well, I wouldn't be talking with you. Parts of the tank struck other houses, and they crumpled like eggs. How we escaped, I am at a loss to explain. Little short of a miracle." Others weren't as lucky. In the nearby Engine 13 firehouse, located behind the molasses tank, firefighters Bill Connor, Fred McDermott, Nat Bowering, and Patty Driscoll were playing cards on their lunch, while colleague George Leahy and friend John Berry watched. The rescue workers had little time to react as Bill Connor, who had been facing the window, saw the wave rushing towards the building, alerting his friends. Patty Driscoll was able to escape the building before the wall of molasses struck the building and lifted Engine 13 firehouse off its foundation, sending it towards Boston Harbor, trapping the remaining men inside. The others struggled to stay afloat in the sticky substance, where they remained trapped for hours. By the time rescue workers had discovered them and fought to reach them through the wreckage of the building, George Leahy finally succumbed and drowned in the thick fluid.
Oh my gosh.
The others survived.
I mean, I hope that this company, had to pay out an enormous amount of money in settlement, because even then it doesn't bring back the people that died, but I hope they were held responsible for this.
Bridget Clarity, who had been outside doing household chores, felt a rumble and sudden rush of air as the tank collapsed. The 25-foot wave ripped through her house, picking her up and carrying her across Commercial Street, where remains of her home fell upon her. Her son, Martin Clarity, a well-known amateur boxer in the area, was home asleep when the wave struck the house. He awoke on his mattress, covered in debris, afloat in a sea of molasses, and was able to find and rescue his brother and sister. He was not able to find his mother, and later learned that she had died before rescue workers could reach her. The wave struck the trestle of the nearby elevated railway, causing it to collapse. Royal Albert Lehman
Man, look at these steel bars. These are steel bars, all bent out of shape, warped. That weight must have just been so huge.
For the elevated railway, saw the wave, and through what could only be called sheer luck, managed to pass over the damaged section and come to a stop, knowing that this was a busy length of track and that a train from North and South Station were just minutes behind his. He ran to a nearby guard shack and told the railway worker on duty to stop the trains. Scrambling onto the trestle, he raised his arms frantically, screaming, "Stop! The track is down!" and was able to get the attention of the oncoming engineer, who stopped the train just in time. After the initial wave, rescue efforts sprang into gear. The USS Nantucket, a gunboat and training ship for midshipmen, was berthed nearby. Lieutenant Commander Howard G. Copeland had heard the rumble and seen the tank collapse. He immediately issued a call to quarters, and 116 sailors from the USS Nantucket rushed to the rescue. They posted guards to keep bystanders away and started wading through the knee-deep molasses, digging through the rubble for survivors. By the time the Boston police arrived, the sailors had pulled more than 20 wounded from the wreckage.
Nice.
Police, firemen, Red Cross workers, and civilians all rushed to help, but the effort was difficult. The molasses was so thick.
Yeah, just having to wade through it that must have been so hard. And those clothes would have been ruined with all that sweet, sticky goo.
It covered everything entirely that it was extremely hard to spot survivors or even identify them. Horses were trapped in the mire, struggling to escape, leaving the police no choice but to kill them. A relief station was set up in Haymarket Square to receive the injured, and according to the Boston Globe, by 1 p.m., only a half hour after collapse, an estimated 100 to 150 people had been taken from the wrecked area, with still untold more who needed help. In the end, nearly 150 people were injured, and 21 were killed.
21 people died! Oh my goodness me. 21 people, that's a lot.
Crushed or drowned in the molasses. The cleanup took weeks, and well over 300 people volunteered. Crews used pressurized seawater from fireboats to wash the molasses residue from the streets and sand to absorb the excess. Recovery efforts took just as long, and many of the dead weren't recovered until weeks later. Cleanup eventually took about 87,000 man-hours. The fire departments had to pump thousands of gallons of molasses from the cellars, and the hardened remains of the substance needed to be removed with chisels, saws, and brooms. People wanted answers, so an investigation was launched, and a month later, in February, the Chief Judge of Boston Municipal Court, Wilfred Bolster, made public the results. There was evidence that indicated the tank was wholly insufficient in point of structural strength to handle its load.
Absolutely.
And held USIA to be guilty of manslaughter.
Absolutely.
120 different lawsuits involving victims of the accident were rolled into a class action suit against Purity Distilling Company and its parent company. Dorr versus United States Industrial Alcohol was the largest class action suit to date in Massachusetts and one of the largest in the United States. The investigation lasted 6 years, included testimony from more than 3,000.
6 years? Why did it take that long? Oh God! So the company obviously just wanted to lengthen it as much as possible, hoping that some of the claimants quit. They didn't want to continue the process. That's just low. You're guilty. What's to dispute? 6 years this took.
1,000 witnesses.
That's a joke.
Purity Distilling's defense blamed the disaster on Italian anarchists who were protesting big businesses. And there was some validity to the claim, as twice before anarchists had targeted United Industrial Alcohol during World War I. It's a defense that could have worked if not for the appointment of Colonel Hugh W. Ogden as auditor to oversee the lawsuit by Massachusetts Superior Court. Ogden was known to despise the motives and methods of anarchists and was a conservative businessman. But he also had a deeper set of beliefs that were grounded in fairness and justice. On April 28, 1925, after years of testimony, Ogden released the Special Report on Liability to the Superior Court of Massachusetts, which rejected outright USIA's claim of sabotage and concluded that the tank collapsed due to structural failure. Ogden assessed the USIA was to pay $300,000 in damages to the estates of the victims, the city of Boston, and the Boston Elevated Railway Company.
So $300,000 in 1919. What's that? Got to be something like $30 million today? I don't know. That doesn't seem enough to me.
Due to their breach of common safety. The 21 fatalities of the Great Molasses Flood seem small when you look at the scope of other disasters, and certainly paled in comparison to the horrific losses of the Great War and the 1918 Spanish influenza pandemic that the world had just survived. But the response to the disaster went beyond the scope of the lives that were tragically lost. Notably, Ogden's verdict represented real financial consequences for business misconduct. As the website Mass Moments noted, Massachusetts and most other states responded to the verdict by passing laws to certify engineers and regulate construction.
So the legacy that it left changed everything.
The molasses cases represented the beginning of the end of an era when big business faced no government restrictions on their activities and no consequences. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the History
Very
Guys,
interesting. So I've just checked it out, and based on a 4% rate of inflation annually, 300,000 in 1919 is about 16.5 million today. So if there were 21 victims, 21 fatalities, assuming that you divide it by that, each person, each estate, each family gets like 700,000, something like that. It doesn't seem enough, honestly. You know, these people died, and there's countless other people who are injured as well. Doesn't seem like enough to me. They should have been forced to pay more because they hired someone who was incompetent. The person wasn't an architect. The designer, apparently he couldn't even read the blueprints. Just ridiculous. But yeah, really, really sad events. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.